What is up, everybody? All you beautiful recruiters, you roguish search firm owners. This is Dave Seven Patterson. You all know me as DSP. This is the Headhunters Live, and we have Mr. Beautiful right down below me, the fantabulous Chris Wessel, looking sharp as
Ouch.
always. And then we have the boss, the brains behind the operation, and he's got a very charming personality, Neil Levovitz. What is up, guys?
Well, you have a beautiful, in the top right corner, you have a beautiful skyline. Oh yeah, and there's Neil too.
The problem is I'm using a light. I should get a Central Park fake zoom background instead of the real thing, because the lighting will be much better. You're not gonna know the difference because it doesn't move. But yeah, it really messes up with my face with the lighting here. But oh well.
Is that what messes up your face?
Oh God. I'm not gifted genetically like you, brother. I wasn't born looking like friggin' Adonis. And like, were you born like that, by the way? The head of blonde hair and blue eyes. Like, did you have a little draper on your loins?
I don't know, but I tell you what, my kid's gonna be even like you should see him. He's a freaking stud.
I have seen him on Facebook.
Yeah, all over. Yeah, you guys saw him on Facebook. Yeah,
I mean, he's beautiful face.
Yeah.
As awesome. Well, guys, today we'll be talking about the temp or not the temp. So all about contract staffing, staff augmentation, temporary staffing, whatever you want to call it. Because for a lot of us, especially going into this economy, we need to start diversifying our income streams, and staff augmentation is a great way to do that. Before we get started, though, if you guys do me a favor, we've had some issues in the last couple of weeks with not going live maybe in certain groups. So if you guys can hear us, please comment live so we know that you're there. If you're watching the replay, comment replay. We want to see who's watching these things. And also while you're at it, give us some likes and some loves and some maybe angry faces, whatever. If we piss you off, let us know. If we make you happy, let us know. We want your emotion. But that said, before we get into it, I do want to say we're going to have to keep a bit of a shorter show today. Right before this show started, my kid's school called me. I got to go pick her up. She has a big headache. So we're going to keep this a little bit on the shorter side. So let's dive right into it. So Neil, this really is your area of expertise, right? So for anybody who doesn't know, tell us what your company does, because I think that is going to provide some context into this discussion.
Yeah,
I've
been a perm guy and from the beginning, right? Very important. Perm search guy, CPA, Robert Half, and then got into the temp side of the business. So that's the real story. My company now is back office staffing solutions. Yeah, we can whether you use someone like me, use on your own. I'm not vested in it for this broadcast, but we provide the back office support, the employment to enable people to do what it is that we're talking about. If they want to broach on the temp side of the business, not worry about a thing, just make the money on it, David. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. Back office staffing solutions, and that's what it is, right? Employer of record, or we can fund payroll. We process payroll time cards. We do all the automation of it. So all people need to do is get a candidate and a client. Duh, they have that. Okay. They just have to think a little differently, to your point, diversification and stuff like that.
Now, I will say this. Real quick. When it comes to temporary staffing, one of the things that when I first got into business, and I always thought of temporary staffing as like your office admin, right? And that's perfectly valid way to do staff augmentation and temporary staffing. But what a lot of folks don't realize, even when you're doing perm, is that if you're placing CFOs, if you're placing developers, if you're placing project managers, any of those sort of roles, really you can staff augmentation really in any role. There are, CFOs that go do, 6-month CFO gigs on an hourly basis, right? And they go through an agency. So I know for me, to give you some context, for me on the SAP side, I recruited SAP for many, many years, for about 15, 16 years. And I'd say probably about maybe 2/3 of my business was contract staffing, where it'd be project managers, solution architects, developers, et cetera. And these companies are doing these implementations or short-term projects. Although a lot of them really turned into long-term projects, one of my best fees, or I shouldn't say fee, but I had a guy working at I think it was Boeing for 3 years, doing almost 70 to 80 hours a week at a $50 margin on the guy on a corp to corp, and I just made buku money for 3 years. So it's just a great source of income if you can make this thing work.
Well, and it's
on it.
Sorry.
No,
Well, I was
that's
going
good.
to say, speeding off what you were saying about SAP or just like higher end technology consultants or whatever, the nature of the beast there, because I did that for a few years, and that's kind of how DSP got my radar years ago. The the candidates, the talent, they want it that way in a lot of cases too, right? So like, for example, with like the high end technology consultants that come in and do an ERP implementation, they're not, you would have a very hard time hiring them full time. That's a huge challenge because they know that they're more marketable as a contractor. They want to work on a 6 month to a year implementation, go on to the next. So whenever I would hire perm in that space, it was very challenging because they're like, I get a much better deal as a contractor. So like it is advantageous for you and the employer, and in a lot of cases it is for the employee.
And financially, to David's point, like just use $100,000 person, $50 an hour, 50% markup. All right. So that leaves like, you'll leave after, let someone like us, 30%, that's $30,000 on a 12-month assignment at a low markup for that kind of business. So you get a lot more.
No, the 50 was actually the margin.
Years,
that was the
2.5
margin,
years, some of them.
actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
you can make
yeah,
$80,000. Yeah. I just, to Chris's point, IT people sometimes are forced into it, but they get scared and they go away. They don't look like, I don't care what your niche is. Okay. The point of the story for me today is you need to do it or not to do it. It's not debatable. I'm a search guy. I started a CPA, started the Robert Half. Robert Half was a search guy. He started the search business in 1949. It wasn't until account temps came over when this guy said, like everyone should be saying, the money's in the temp. I love this. I'm never going to get away with it. I'm Robert Half. I'm going to always be Robert Half. But account temps is where we're going to become billionaires. And that's what was told to me early on. Dude, you're gifted. Okay. You're running the perm group. You got to get in the temp. You want to master this industry. You want to be a player. You want to be wealthy. Temp. But perm people don't look at it that way, especially when you work for a company. Temp's a stepchild, David. Like you're saying, it's not sexy. You're even trying to make it say, hey, it could be sexy. That's even how you started it off because they need it to be. I'll tell you this. It doesn't have to be nearly as sexy for much better business. Let's say you want it to be sexy. Make it sexy. Keep it your level of business. I'll turn it back over to you because I want to add some color to this. But, my point is we talked on a lot of shows about leverage. We talked about recession. And, this fits right in. You need to leverage. What other business would you allow your inventory to use 0.01% of your delivery? I mean, that's insanity. And if you are a CEO of your own company and you have, let's say you're a bigger company, and this is what we try to do with this, you have to act like your own CEO. What are you doing to leverage that stuff? And I have lots of ideas throughout the broadcast. We don't have a lot of time on it, but let's say you want to keep it sexy, Dave, and you just want to do SAP and you're doing that. You need to get into it. You need to do what Chris said. You have to offer this. You can't, I'm a pro. Let's do search. That's your main thing. Fine. But I offer consulting. Not only that, but you need to do it. I'm telling you, you'll make more money on it down the road.
There's also the point of, let's say real quick, also if you're doing permanently perm, at least on the SAP side of things, or at least IT in general. I think this would apply really for most positions in most industries. But I know for me, oftentimes I'd have a perm spot, and then they don't want to make somebody an offer, but they want to do contract to hire, right? And so even for those situations where you do a contract to hire, you need to have the ability to, or just be set up so we can take that kind of business.
That's
right. The main thing.
Register with costs, all joking aside. But I want to add this, think of it this way. And that's what I say before. One of my big tips for everyone is don't allow the client to dictate that strategy. It's the only time people do. My client wants to go temp to perm. So do you have a solution? David, dead on. But you initiate it. What I want you all to do, you can get into the temp business today by looking at every one of your consultants, your contractors, whatever your niche is, that is unemployed, okay? Anytime they're ever unemployed, or their job's tenuous and they're looking to get out soon, there's an ending. Anytime, which is a lot now, and it's going to be increasing as the economy slows down, okay? You need to pitch them temp to perm on top of your search, okay? This is what I'm gonna leave you with, not leave you with, but this is my main thing. Sell everything as your search, and also, Mr. Klein, and I want to talk to you about this other angle we're going to do that I propose. The contract side. I'm still going to do all the stuff. You're not competing with it. You're going to give them a different solution. If I find someone And when I find someone unemployed, or if I get someone good, I'd like to go the angle of temp. I want to consider that also. Well, no, you're not competing against yourself. What you're doing is you're locking in your odds dramatically when you go temp to perm. Dramatically.
Well,
strategy.
Yeah, and on that point too, so you want to have just the option to, right? If the
100%.
opportunity presents itself. One of the things I had in my firm where for about 10 years, I had an IT staffing firm that did, among other things, temp and temp to perm. And we like a couple $1 million a year in terms of like perm billings, right? So not huge, but significant. And especially over 10 years, my default agreement encompassed like as an umbrella agreement that encompassed both temp to hire, like conversion tables and stuff, and like perm fee, so that way when an opportunity presented itself, that wasn't the point at which we had to have that conversation. Like we were already in alignment on we had a structure ready to go.
Exactly.
Like we had the infrastructure like physically to provide temps, which we got to talk about, but also like my agreements were basically choose your own adventure. And then we could apply it when that came. We didn't have to do like some people have a different agreement. They'll have like a perm agreement, a temp agreement. It's really hard to introduce that later in the process to the point of kind of the example you were giving, Neil.
Yeah.
Well, now let's talk about getting that business. That's one thing I think that we need to think about is it's nothing to be set up for that, but how do you broach the conversation with either with your current clients or new clients or prospects? So from my perspective, and I was never really deep into temp. I was very early in my career, and I did day labor at one point, and then I started to cost it. But when I got into search, I did a lot of temp work until SAP, and for me, when we were cold calling, this is back in the mid 2000s all the way up through like a few years ago, and we were cold calling, at least in the IT space. One of the things that there's so many what we call body shops, right? Pitching H-1B candidates or very, very low level consultants. What happens is that oftentimes our big objection immediately be we don't need consultants. Right. And that was like the number one thing, because they'd always assume that we're pitching consultants. And for us, it was always easier to get in on the perm side. And then once you get on the perm side and get an agreement, they say, oh, hey, also, by the way, do you have any upcoming projects? Do you have any implementations? Do you have any initiatives that are coming? Or do you have, and so it was a lot easier to get in on the perm side, at least for me.
Any maternity leaves, any project backlogs, anything that causes this gazillion-dollar industry that is so much bigger than perm and so much more recession proof than perm, right? Like, duh.
And
yeah, because oftentimes if they're not hiring direct hire, they don't want to pay fees. Oftentimes there's the budget for contractors. It's a different budget. They're not hiring. It's a different bucket. Yeah. So if a company has earmarked,
it's personnel. They look at it as an offshore of personnel. It's human resource. It's human capital. They don't look at search fees that way, people. It's an expense that they want to avoid.
And it's often through a different source too. Like you might not have to even encounter like HR or anything like that, because it's not a hire. It's a line item in a hiring manager's budget for their P&L.
The dreaded line item that they get criticized for spending. Let me add on to my thought, David, not counter to yours, but a different angle. Yours is dead on. And what I'm saying is, if you don't want to do it, back to my point, if your people are unemployed, I always want you to broach, listen, I have unemployed people. I'm going to submit them and I want to try to go temp to perm. And you're going to sell the benefits of doing that when you have it on the same search. And what Chris was saying also, and the benefit to you is massive and the benefit to them is massive. And you need to know both. The benefit to you doing this, not waiting for your client to initiate it, but you doing it. The benefit is you're locking out your competition. Your close ratio in this deal goes from whatever your number is, 10%, 12, 15, 18, 20, whatever that is, it's going to go up to 80. 90 if you have the right good person, and not even the right. And people hire on temp based upon emotion, based upon connection. It's everything a recruiter dreams of.
It's
not
easier
to close a lot faster.
It's
close
not,
a lot faster as well.
It closes itself because they have punch. It's a puppy dog close. The puppy is opened up in the box and it's running around their Christmas tree, and they don't give it
100%.
back. So now that's a benefit to you, and I could go nuts on the math of it. You're securing both angles. Statistically, your numbers and your business will skyrocket. That's one. The other one is what the other person put up, and we'll put that up later. We don't have to talk about valuation now, but that's huge. All right, we'll talk about that. Okay, and it's much more of an annuity. Okay, we'll talk about all the reasons to do temp. The client side, how to sell it. is, oh my gosh, you need to use both angles. It's the best way to avoid a mishire. That's their biggest expense, mishire. You know that. We'll do tons of training on mishires. There's been tons of podcasts on it. They avoid the mishire. You're going to hire this person. You're going to know. You're going to have lunch with them. You're going to see their work. Someone could tell you anything. Interviews don't matter. You got to get good at that. They don't matter. Good people interview great. Good people stink at it sometimes. Bad people can interview great and they get the job, and they're bad. Bad people stink sometimes.
Well, I just want to add to that as far as
that's all I got. That's the main point. So go ahead.
So to add to the employer benefit piece of it too, it opens up their access to all talent, basically. Because if you're strictly looking to hire someone full time, like we all know that the way the economy has evolved, I don't want to say gig economy necessarily, because that's not entirely like, but a lot of people are being a little more choosy about how they take on work and the manner in which they take on work. A lot more people are comfortable with, kind of doing contract work or short-term work or project work, and maybe cobbling together a couple of gigs into a job. So if you are, as a hiring manager, are only looking at people looking for a full-time W-2 job, you are eliminating part of the talent market. So
so for me, actually, at the same point, when I'm taking a job order for, let's say, like a hybrid developer, right, which is kind of like a niche skill within SAP, hard to find. Most people are contractors; they want to make all the money, guys, because that's where the money is. And they were paying, I don't know, 120, 130K, and I'd say, well, great, we can see if we can find somebody, but keep in mind, most of these developers, these hybrid developers, are consultants. They're making almost double that on contracting. So would you, if we find a great contractor, would you accept them? Because for a lot of these folks, they have timelines they need to meet for these projects. They need to get a body in there, and they'd rather get a full timer. But when they can't, and time is of the essence, sometimes contracting makes sense. So it's good to at least offer it, and you show more of a expertise on the market, where you could say, well, here are your odds of finding somebody full-time. Now we could also do this, and give them some options to work with, instead of just taking a search. And then
by the way, what else do you have where I can be a consultant? Or then, by the way, for other things. But even if it's not an oh, by the way, which the oh, by the way is the best close ever to segue that David gave. But, that's it. Go in. This is what we got. I'm coming to. I'm going to do the search, and we're going to. No, I don't want to do temp. Oh no, we're going to. I want you to do it that way. Why not? Don't just say, okay, you don't want to do it. I tried. No, why not? Why would we not want to minimize? I'm only going to send someone that I think is going to do it. If we can do it, it's your best avenue. And to your other point, Chris, and then I'll turn it back over, is the contracting comfort level, the economy, the move. It's been going on. They've been telling it for the last 10 years. It's accelerating massively. And post-COVID, the virtualization. How are you not in this? How does anyone on this call, not using me or someone else, how do you not have a back office all signed sealed? No, there's no cost to enter for me. There's no setup fees. Are you not selling this and ready to go when your client comes to you, which is passive, and not saying yes? Okay, so I don't want you to be passive anymore. I want you to initiate it all the time and get set up with me or someone else. David, could you flash how they could do it? If you want more info from me and just to learn about how it works, there's two ways you can do it. One, you can reach out to us at backofficestaffingsolutions.com/contact. I'll put up the book in a second, David. All right, contact. You can speak with us. We'll explain how it works. We'll get you set up. If you don't want to, you can just go to backofficestaffingsolutions.com/enroll. You'll see an enrollment tab under the page there too. You can go there. And our Staffing by the Book, David, you want to pick that up. It'll teach you everything you need to know. For me, for anyone, if you want to factor, if you want to do it on your whatever, everything you need to know about the contracting business. What's workers' comp? How does it fit in? What are these statutory costs? And again, don't be scared by it, because listen, we put the book together because we do all that for everyone as one of our products, turnkey. Okay, so take advantage of that and learn more. Go ahead. Now, yeah.
So I think that's a good segue into spending a little bit of the several minutes we have left on how do you even get started and what are your options, right? Yeah. Because I think that's an important takeaway for people. And I think to even understand what like Neil's company offers or other options are out there, you kind of have to understand the ways that you can get into this. And some of them have different barriers to entry than others. And for example, go ahead.
And also include in this as well, also include in there, if you have a company that actually wanted a temp, like what do you need to ask? Like questions you need to cover in the conversation, so that way you're not shooting yourself in the foot. So I want to make sure I
yeah. Well, because I know we're kind of toggling between like the sales side of it and like the behind the scenes operations side of it. Just real quick for everybody who's listening who might not be familiar and might not know all the terminology. Like one of the approaches I took for years was I used a factoring company. What a factoring company does is essentially, factoring companies exist in other types of businesses besides staffing. Essentially, it's someone buying your invoices, right? Now, in this case, they're also payrolling your people. Now, most of the time, they're doing that as your company's employee, but they're handling the billing. It's all kind of white labeled. They're handling the billing. They're floating the payroll. They're paying your people. There's usually some kind of time entry system that comes along with it. That is a way you can enter. It's going to require credit checks, maybe some cash up front in reserve, that kind of thing. Something you want to think about that I had to learn kind of the hard way is that when you are going about it this way, the money that you're floating is costing you money every day. So you might calculate like, oh, I have X pay rate and a burden of like X amount based on like payroll taxes, blah, 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 the cost, the percentage that the factoring company is charging me, et cetera. So my margin is a 65% markup and I'm making 50%, whatever. What you have to understand that I, again, learned the hard way is that works if it happens within like a certain time frame, and that's not how reality plays out. So you have to think about the fact that, like, let's say I have this person billing, and yeah, you can have a 7-day net 7, net 15 on your invoices, but that doesn't mean shit if you're working with some big huge company that just pays you when they pay you. If they're paying you at 45 days, like it's eroding your margins.
Yeah.
Right? So
now,
you have
what
to
you
be
get
watching that carefully. Yeah. So it's just, when you do that, it's a viable route, but you really have to watch your aging of your receivables, because okay, they're handling it for me and blah, blah, blah. And you might just see the money hitting your bank account. But if you're really trying to run a business and you're really trying to look at your profitability and your margins, it can be fluid, and you really have to keep an eye on that. The other one, and we can talk about factoring a little more. The other one,
I want to say, just stick on factoring. People should know the advantage of factoring.
Yes.
Is it's asset-based lending in essence. It's kind of like it. It's the same thing. It's a different approach to it. You're borrowing off your asset, which is your invoice, okay? Yep. And your invoice is much higher than your cost. So the way a factoring company will work is they'll say, look, we like these receivables. They're not going to take anything risky, by the way. And after 90 days, you're out. They're going to get the money back.
Oh, they're going to run a DNB on your customer.
Yeah.
They're extending credit.
They're going to be all over it, and you're on the hook with it. That said, you get to borrow 80 to 95% of your invoice. Now, as Chris said, your markup's 50%. Your cost to employee with statutory costs is what you're looking at. I don't know, it could be 35% maybe of the whole thing, 55%, whatever. You have a lot of extra capital to invest on your business or squander away on interest expense, but you have a lot of extra capital if you're going to be strategic, because you can use the money your way. You can also get in a lot of trouble about being over leveraged, but it gives you the most flexibility because you're doing your own funding there. Okay, Chris, keep going.
Yeah, sure. No, and that's another great angle to it, because again, this is all stuff that was new to me when I was doing it, and even a couple of years in, it took me to really grasp all these
totally. And my book, not just that, the book's great because I covered everything I think people need to know through us, doing anything on your own. It doesn't matter. It explains how all that works, factoring, all of that. Keep going, Chris.
Yeah. And so another thing that I was able to kind of graduate to at one point was the self-funding. Everyone's like, oh, you got to self-fund because then the numbers are better. You're not, but the thing with self-funding is, yes, well, while you're not paying interest, you're not paying for floating that cash. You are also paying the price of tying up cash, which I didn't really love that. So I'd probably rather go with a factoring company or use a company like Neil's, where I'm basically just getting sent the margin. Because while self-funding, I think is at bottom line more profitable in terms of like how many, like what you're getting, like what's coming out of that. But personally, I felt like I would rather allocate that cash.
Yeah, and the money's the least of it. The time that you will spend filing,
administering it. That's the other thing too.
And that's where the expense is.
Well, also, there's the insurance as well, because if they're on your W-2, for example, a lot of times these companies require a lot of insurance, and if you're not set up for that, you got to go. If you're going to self-fund, you got to go get all that insurance as well. Versus,
absolutely.
And sometimes too, when you're with a factoring company,
great way to go.
Sorry.
Yeah, you could save a lot of money. It could be a great way to go self-funded. Or listen, there's options too. Like in a boss, again, this is a plug, of course, but you'll be self-funded with us. We call it our capital. I mean, or no, we fund it rather. Our capital plan will fund it. You're an employer of record, or we can be employer of record and you fund it. Meaning we'll still do all the processing, the time card, the watching it, the management of the aging, there's all of that.
Yes, you can have it a couple ways. Yeah.
Exactly. And but do it your own way. You could skin the cat, to your point, Chris, a lot of ways. You got factoring, you got self-funded, but it's not all or nothing. You can do self-funded with an employer of record, without, any option you want. Keep going, Chris. I love all the options.
I think that what ends up happening is like, so you have the initial, like, okay, all right, guys, you convinced me. I'm going to do temp, right? So you get out there and you start doing this and you're like, okay, this is great. Some recurring revenue, whatever. And then the reason why I start getting in the weeds of factoring versus self-funding versus EOR, et cetera, is because you will find if you're successful and you get to the point where you have 50, 100 temps, whatever, now you're starting to think about the finances a lot more and how the time is spent and the administrative overhead and all these things, because you're able to take a step back.
Yeah, but then not at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 temps. There's like again, for a boss and employer of record, you can have a temp out tomorrow if you wanted to. There's no paper. It's just easy.
Well, and that's the barrier to entry thing, I think. Like, so even with a factoring company, we had credit application. A few of us had to apply. We had to put some money up, like, because we were,
UCCs and your receivable, personal guarantees, personal credit check, all of it. You sign everything away with it. You have to.
Yeah. So the barrier to entry, you could go to an EOR like Boss and like you're set up and you got somebody billing like tomorrow. And so I think it's important to illustrate those other options and why a lot of people, I think, don't go this path, because they only know the other options, and how I think that underscores the significance of your offering, frankly. So I think that was, I don't know, that's why I want to make sure I touched on that.
Yeah.
Well, now, so, one thing I want to talk about is how to get temp business, right? And so for example, like, how do you pitch it? What do you say? And so I want to talk about it from my perspective, because again, I worked in the SAP world for many years. That's the perspective that I have. So obviously it's going to be a little bit different in every industry. But I know for me, when I looked at the pain points from other prospects that I reach out to, a lot of them are using the Accentures of the world and Deloittes of the world, or the Infosys and
which is just temp staffing with a window dressing on it.
Yes, it is. It's
exactly.
All it is.
They're very, very high price consultants. And what I would usually say, and I don't like to compete on price, but at the end of the day, when it comes to contracting, it is a little bit different. And I would compete on price in the sense that I would in essence tell them that, because we're using these independent contractors. The independent contractors, typically the top level contractors, they don't want to work for the Accentures because they're going to make more money as independents. And I'd let them know that you're going to be getting top of the line consultants really for a fraction of the cost, because we don't have the overhead of the Accentures and the Deloittes and the Ernst & Young.
Fraction.
Yeah, it's a fraction. And so because and in fact, one thing I would often say is that they would be paying top dollar for basically junior consultants, because a lot of times these Accentures and Deloittes of the world, they'll send their junior people and they're training on the job while like massively overbilling them. And it's a racket. And a lot of these IT hiring managers or leaders know that. They hate that. And so being able to offer that as an alternative is a big one. And secondly, the other thing about this as well is, and this is another side note, this really isn't necessarily how to get temp business, but one thing that's great about temp business that I really love being in the SAP space was that if I wanted to reach into a company and do some research on the company before I called or maybe before a meeting, I would always go on LinkedIn, look for consultants that had been there on projects in the last year, because on these consultants, they'll list out every single freaking project, which is why in IT you have these 20-page resumes. And I go find the most recent projects, and they list out everything they did, the implementations, the technology, etc. I might even call the consultant and just and try to get information from them. So when I'm calling in, I'm really knowledgeable about all their latest projects, their initiatives, et cetera. And it sounded like I was really in the know. And in reality, I just looked up contractors' resumes and looked to see what they did in the last, say, 6 months at that company. And boom, I'm like inside there. And so I think from that perspective, that was a really great tool that I used back in the day.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think the bottom line is, don't be intimidated by how to do it. You need to offer you represent talent and your talent marketplace, and you're in there. And to Chris's point, you're cutting out a huge amount of your inventory and their network. And your job also is to provide them with talent in your space and in your niche. And it's all about networking. And what people get through a recruiter that I always used to say, no matter what, you want to use an ad, you want to use Indeed, you want to use, you're going to use me still. Why not see the best people network? They might be an employee of yours 2 years down the road, their cousin, whatever. Know the best people in your niche. You have to be selling, know good talent. And now, okay, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I'm sorry. So here's another angle too that doesn't relate to kind of selling, or it's another value add when you can do temps or when you can provide temp contract, whatever the fuck you want to call it. Basically, there have been scenarios in which, like, a lot of times the value of a recruiter is placed on that you found someone, right? But we can also provide a employment mechanism. So I would have people that were like, listen, I got some guys, guys, girls, whatever. I got some people I want to put on this project. I don't want to put them on my payroll. Can you handle it? Charge me a markup, whatever. So you could do some of that too. And if you're listening in conversation, and so there's a new value add that you bring, which is not just that I find people for you and I provide a mechanism for employment, but I can even just do that. So you have to be open-minded and listen for opportunity.
How does everyone not want to be in this game? And whether you believe like I was convinced, and again, it was hard. I was a search guy, right? I didn't want to be account temps. I wasn't one of those. They were the lower level people. I hate to say it. They weren't the good big 6, big 8 at the time, big 4 now, CPA coming out. They weren't us and you guys on the call, right, in this group, right? But get that out of your head. Do both, add on, tap into it, leverage, add on, everyone said.
Well, we have a question here from Zale Harrow. Yes. All right. So, hey guys, how did you kick the first door down? So I'm assuming he's saying, how do we get that first temp, or we first get in there? So the one thing I would do, and again, everybody has a different technique, but for me, whenever I talk to a prospect, and they may not be hiring, they may not, whatever, but if I can ask questions about, okay, what sort of projects do you have? Are you guys using Accenture? Are you guys using Deloitte? What sort of initiatives, any implementations? And you start asking those questions. And a lot of times, if they say they got a project coming up, and sometimes you have to kind of get them at the right time, but oftentimes, it's better, at least for me, it was better if I'm talking to a line leader. So for example, like maybe a manager or director or whatever, and they had a project going on, he want to take a look at some contractors, instead of going through the whole process to get an agreement in place, right? Which can take forever. And sometimes these things close in a matter of like a couple of days, if that, and they go really, really quick. Because, and by the way, on a little side note, at least on the IT side, if you have a search for a full-time position, it can take a week or two to get candidates. For a contract, you got to move now. You got to get people same day, if not next day, because oftentimes, as soon as a contract is announced, you've got the wolves are all jumping on and so what I would do is go find a couple of independent contractors, submit them in, ask them what their budget is, and start submitting these folks in, and then start working on the contract on the back end. Because the thing about contract, again, again, this is the way I did it, is that it's one thing to have you send a candidate over without an agreement and they hire that person full time, right? That's not something I would ever recommend. Always have an agreement in place. But on a contract, they're not going to bring in that contractor directly. They need a company to run that contractor through. And I would rather move extremely fast, get somebody that they really, really want, that they're sold on, and then use that leverage to fast track a contract through to legal, versus the other way around. That's the way I look at it. You guys may disagree with that, but that's the way I approach it. You gotta move really fast.
No, that makes sense. I mean, that's the path. The path, I think, is quicker and actually easier for the client in a lot of cases, right? Because like you were saying, that if they're pushing to like legal, they want a contract approved, it's not a full-time employee. It's a different bucket. In many cases.
And the easiest path. I'm sorry, Chris. Finish up.
I was gonna say so they're drawing from a different bucket, so it's viewed differently. It might completely bypass other normal hiring channels. The other thing is it's not a hard sell. Think about this. If you're direct hire and you're selling $20, $25, $30,000 fees, or even 10 or 15 or whatever, you're talking to someone about a try before you buy, incremental cost type of situation. Right. So like if you got people who are agreeing to pay you $20,000 for somebody, it's not very difficult for you to have a conversation where you say to someone like, listen, we'll have it's relatively low commitment. They'll have like one quick interview and they'll go like right to work. You don't have to overthink it. Sure, if you're going to hire someone full time and give me a big fee, you're going to want to have a few interviews and you're going to want to really decide. But you know what? Let's get them in the door. Let's get them start working. They're only going to cost you as much as how many days they've worked so far. And we just pay as you
what
go.
you're implying that we didn't mention, you're implying, which is a great point, that it's not just temp margin. You'll get your search fee also on the contractor if you want to. That's what you're also saying. It's yeah, right. You get your foot in the door, try before you buy. You're gonna be spending 20 grand, spending on some temp margin. It's incremental. You're gonna be spending 20 grand, and that right to your point, Chris. Right. So you can get your margin is margin, whether you get it as a search fee, conversion fee, whether you get it as a discounted thing after and you get 10, 20 grand in temp margin. Who cares? You just made 80 grand on this person over 3 years.
Right.
And then you give it
and for the employer perspective, it's easier for them to pull the trigger because they're on the hook for this. They're not deciding, do I want to give Chris $20,000 based on like a couple of interviews, and then maybe he either has to find me another person or this person works out, or they think to themselves, let's have a quick meeting. I mean, go to work. So I don't know, that's maybe a thing of the past, but have a quick meeting with this person. That makes sense. Okay, let's get them started. Okay. And after a couple of weeks, they don't work out. We're talking about a few invoices, a couple of $1,000s, whatever it is. Like there's less at risk for them, so it should be an easier conversation.
That's risk,
and that's why
faster close. It can be fairly easy to get in there. If you work in getting the contract before the agreement, then it can go really, really fast. And the great thing is, for a lot of contract work, it bypasses HR.
Well, that's what I was saying.
Not our companies, but for a lot of them, they do, and that is amazing. Because again,
it's coming out of the P&L of yeah. Sorry, I'm agreeing with you.
Exactly. No, 100%. Yeah, it's coming of the manager that they're working for, right? And so oftentimes you're not even dealing with HR at all. It's really more of a procurement issue. All right.
Yeah,
well,
so my last thought. I know we're out of time. I want to just add on my final thought on that, because I think the easy to answer the last question, and then David will close, is the easiest way is what Chris just said, and for the reason Chris said, David, I agree with you. It's not the easiest. The easiest way is to take every search order you have from now on and convert it to a temp order also by convincing them that they also need to consider consultant to hire every time, to the point where when I was leading all these groups, one of my KPI that I would consider that a temp solicitation. You have to bring in a new temp order. That's one. It is one. Now you can say, well, everyone's going to say that then. No, they can't, because you also track their fill ratio, and then all of a sudden their fill ratio, that's a temp order. Everyone, okay, and I'm a broken record here. That's the easiest route. And to Chris's point, that's my message. Use Boss, use one of my competitors, use a factoring company, get set up today. Thank you.
All right, so Chris, I didn't mean to cut you up before. So if you want to wrap up what you were saying, I didn't mean to. Sorry about that.
No, yeah, that's okay. And then just on my final thought in the same line as Neil's, basically get set up to be able to do it. Have it as an option, even if you never use it. Have it in your agreement that it includes that basic. I mean, you could always have a schedule of work separate from it, but have an umbrella agreement that basically includes your temp terms, your perm terms,
and add it to your website. Add we do it. Just add it. Go to your WordPress. Go to whatever. Go to your Wix. Just add it. Do it.
And then you're set up, and then you can direct the conversation wherever it makes the most sense to go.
Yep.
Exactly. All right, guys. Well, that said, we're going to wrap this up, folks. Like I said, I had to leave a little bit early, but I do want to announce we're going to have our very first guest for our Headhunters Live show next week. And that would be the one and only David Perry, the author of Hiring Greatness, as well as Executive Recruiting for Dummies. So with that said, guys, tune in tomorrow. It's going to be a great show.
If you want to read it in advance for him, they're really good books. I haven't read them. Full disclosure, I got them, but they're good, and a lot of good feedback on them. So it's a real deal. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So David Perry has done about, I think in the last 30 years, 1,600 placements, all retained, all leadership. So this guy knows what he's talking about. That's one of my favorite interviews. He's a close personal friend.
I can't wait to learn from him.
So yeah, he's great.
Yeah, I like him a lot. We had him on Headhunters a couple of years ago.
I saw that interview. That was a really good one.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It is fantastic. All right, folks. That's it. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate the time. Thank you all. Love you all. And yeah, I'll see you next week. Everybody. Peace
Thank
out.
you, everyone. Peace out.